Her mate rejected her in public for her sister, but the Alpha King claimed her in front of them all. Banners fluttered in the breeze, each one adorned with the sigils of the kingdom's noble families. The air was alive with laughter, music, and the chatter of courtiers, yet her heart felt heavy. Today was meant to be a celebration, a display of unity and joy, but for her it had become a day of quiet dread. She adjusted the silver clasp of her cloak and tried to steady her breathing. Everyone would be there. Her family, her sister Leora, the nobles, and most importantly, Kaelin, her fated mate. The thought of him made her pulse quicken with both excitement and fear. Their bond was known across the kingdom. Prophecies spoke of them, the princess and her destined mate who would bring peace to the fractured lands. Yet, a small, gnawing fear whispered at the edge of her mind. What if he did not feel the same? The festival square was a whirl of color and motion. Children ran between stalls, merchants shouted their wares, and musicians played a lively tune that echoed off the stone walls. Alara's father, King Alaric, sat on the throne-like dais in the center, his eyes scanning the crowd with a sharpness that demanded respect. Her mother, Queen Mariel, radiated elegance, her gown of deep sapphire contrasting with her pale skin, the kind of beauty that seemed untouchable. Leora moved ahead of Alara, laughing lightly with the ladies of the court, her hair glinting gold in the morning light. Alara's heart ached. She loved her sister, but she also felt the sting of comparison. Leora had always been the brighter star in every room, the one whose smile could win hearts and whose laughter could charm any crowd. And now, it seemed, she would win Kaelin too. The crowd hushed as the ritual of the day began, a traditional ceremony where fated mates were expected to acknowledge their bond before the kingdom. The priests, dressed in robes of midnight blue, carried candles that glimmered in the soft morning sun. Alara's hands trembled, and she caught sight of Kaelin. He looked handsome, as always, with dark hair that fell carelessly over his forehead and eyes that held the kind of depth that made others feel both comforted and unworthy. His gaze met hers for a brief moment, and she smiled, hoping to see warmth there. But his expression was cold, unreadable, and her stomach sank. The priests raised their hands, and the crowd fell silent. Kaelin stepped forward. Alara straightened, her chin high, determined to show courage even as her heart quivered. He began to speak, and at first his words seemed ordinary, polite, ceremonial. But then he said something that made the world tilt beneath her feet. I cannot claim you, Alara," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm, as if he had practiced the betrayal many times in his mind. "My heart belongs to another, to Leora." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some whispered in shock, others stared in disbelief. Alara froze, unable to move. The world felt distant, muffled, as though a storm had swept through her senses. Her sister's laughter, once so joyful, now sounded like the sharp edge of a knife. Leora's smile faltered, a flicker of guilt crossing her features before she tried to hide it behind a practiced mask. Alara felt the warmth of blood rush to her face, her pride burning with humiliation. Her fated mate, her destiny, had rejected her publicly in front of everyone. She wanted to speak, to yell, to demand why, but no sound came. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder. Noble families exchanged glances, the tension thickening in the crisp morning air. Alara's father's face darkened with anger, his jaw tightening. Kaelin's words had not only wounded his daughter's heart but had publicly dishonored her. And then, a sound cut through the chaos. Heavy boots echoed against the stone floor of the plaza. The crowd parted instinctively as a new presence approached. Alara felt it before she saw it, a pulse of power, dark and undeniable, brushing against her senses like the wings of a storm. He stepped into view, the Alpha King, Draven, the ruler of the wolf-blooded clans, a man spoken of in hushed tones across the kingdom. Tall, imposing, with eyes as sharp as obsidian and hair black as midnight, he moved with the confidence of one who commanded not just armies but the very winds. A hush fell over the festival. Even Kalen turned to look, his pride faltering in the presence of a man who radiated authority and danger. Draven's gaze locked onto Alara, and she felt something inside her shift, a pull that was both terrifying and electrifying. Her chest tightened. He was staring at her as though he had been searching for her all his life. Without a word, he approached the dais. The crowd parted further, leaving him space as he stopped before her. His voice, deep and resonant, broke the stunned silence. Enough. The single word carried the weight of command. The wind seemed to bow to him, and even the priests lowered their heads. He looked directly at Kalen. "She is mine." The words echoed like a drumbeat through the plaza. Alara's heart raced, a mix of fear, disbelief, and a spark of something dangerous, something thrilling. The Alpha King claimed her publicly in front of everyone, leaving no room for denial. Kalen's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Leora's eyes widened in shock, her carefully maintained composure faltering. The murmurs of the crowd rose into a low roar, but Draven's presence silenced them. He extended his hand toward Alara, the gesture both a command and an invitation. She hesitated, torn between pride, fear, and the inexplicable pull she felt toward this powerful man. Her fated mate had rejected her, and yet here was someone claiming her with a force that made her feel alive in a way she had never known. Finally, trembling but determined, she placed her hand in his. The moment their fingers touched, a strange warmth surged through her body, spreading from her heart to every fingertip. A hum of energy, dark, potent, and alive, surrounded her. She gasped, feeling both exposed and protected. Draven's eyes softened just slightly, a flicker of something almost tender behind the storm of authority. "You belong to me," he whispered, and the words wrapped around her like a cloak, both comforting and binding. The crowd erupted, some cheering, others whispering anxiously. Alara felt all eyes upon her, but her focus remained on Draven, the man who had claimed her in a moment that would change everything. Her chest ached with conflicting emotions, anger at Kalen, resentment toward Leora, and an undeniable curiosity about the Alpha King. Who was he truly? Why had he come to claim her? And what did it mean that her heart, against her will, had begun to respond to him? Draven did not release her hand. Instead, he led her through the festival square, each step deliberate, each glance calculated to draw attention. Nobles whispered, children stared wide-eyed, and even her parents were frozen in a mixture of awe and fear. When they reached the edge of the plaza, Draven stopped. His eyes, dark and intense, bore into hers. "Do not let them break you," he said softly but with authority. "I will not allow it. You are mine, Alara, and no one will take you from me." Alara's breath caught. The weight of his words pressed upon her, but instead of fear, she felt a spark of hope, fragile but undeniable. Here was someone who claimed her, not out of ceremony, but with purpose, with force, with something that stirred her very soul. As the festival continued around them, the world seemed to fade. For the first time that day, Alara felt a strange, thrilling certainty. Her life had been shattered in the light of public rejection, but now, in the shadow of a king's claim, she felt the first stirrings of her own power, her own voice. Draven guided her to a secluded balcony above the square. Below, the festival raged on, oblivious to the quiet, electric tension that hung between them. He turned to face her, his hand still holding hers, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice low, almost a growl, "you will learn what it means to be mine. But tonight, rest, princess. Let the world see what it will, and we will decide our path together." Alara nodded, her mind spinning with questions, fear, and the faintest glimmer of hope. The festival, her humiliation, Kalen's betrayal, all of it felt distant now. Here was a new beginning, dark and uncertain, but hers to step into. She watched Draven step back, his cloak billowing in the evening breeze, and felt a strange thrill. For the first time in her life, she realized that being claimed could mean power, strength, and perhaps even freedom. And deep within her, something awakened, a spark of destiny she could not yet name, but which promised that her life from this moment forward would never be the same. The moon rose high, casting silver light over the city. In its glow, Ilara understood one truth: the world had tried to break her, but in the hands of the Alpha King she would rise. And somewhere in the shadows of her heart, she wondered, was she ready for what came next? The castle of the Alpha King rose like a dark sentinel above the forest, its jagged towers cutting through the morning mist. Ilara's carriage rolled up the winding path, her heart still heavy from the events in the festival square. The world had witnessed her humiliation, her fated mate's rejection, and the shocking claim of Draven, the Alpha King. And now the castle loomed before her, a fortress of stone, shadow, and unspoken power. As the heavy wooden doors swung open, a gust of cold air met her, carrying the scent of pine, smoke, and something older, ancient, commanding. Draven stood at the entrance, his eyes dark as midnight, watching her carefully. The moment she stepped out of the carriage, he extended his hand again. "You will follow me," he said, his voice a low command, yet under it was a hint of something almost gentle. "Do not fear. You are mine, and I will keep you safe." Ilara's fingers trembled as she placed her hand in his. Safety was not a word she associated with him or anyone, and yet she felt it, faint and unsteady like a candle flickering in a storm. The castle halls were vast and echoing. Tapestries of dark hues adorned the walls, depicting ancient battles and figures of power. Candles burned in iron sconces, casting flickering shadows that danced across the stone floors. Every footstep she took seemed to resonate, a reminder that she was no longer in the familiar world of her father's palace. She was somewhere different, somewhere dangerous, yet fascinating. Draven led her to a chamber at the heart of the castle. It was surprisingly warm, with a fire crackling in a grand hearth and windows that looked out over the forests below. For a moment, Ilara allowed herself to breathe. Here, at least, she was away from the whispers of the court, from Kaelin's betrayal, and from Leora's smug smiles. "You will stay here," Draven said, "until you understand what it means to be mine." Ilara's stomach twisted. "Yours? Do you mean that as a warning?" Draven shook his head. "No, as a truth. The bond between us is not a ceremony or a claim of power alone. It is something deeper. Something that will shape your life and mine." She looked away, unsure if she should be comforted or afraid. Her mind was a storm of questions. Why had he claimed her? Did he understand the weight of what he was asking? Could she trust him? And what of Kaelin, her fated mate who had rejected her so publicly? Days passed in a strange blur. The castle was alive with its own rhythms, servants moving silently, wolves heard howling in the distance, and shadows that seemed almost alive. Draven introduced her to the ways of his world, the discipline, the power, and the secrets of the wolf-blooded clans. Each lesson was a challenge, a test of both body and mind, but always with an undercurrent of tension between them. He was strict, demanding, and utterly commanding. Yet in moments when she faltered, he offered guidance, sometimes in a word, sometimes in a look. And slowly, Ilara realized that she was learning, not just about his world, but about herself. Strength she had never known began to awaken, subtle and electric. One evening she found herself in the library, a grand room of dark wood and golden light, with shelves that stretched high toward the ceiling. Draven was there, standing near a table, his gaze following her as she moved between the rows of books. "You seek knowledge," he said, almost a statement, almost a question. "Yes," she admitted. "I want to understand this world and perhaps myself." He stepped closer. "Knowledge is power," he said quietly, "and power can protect you or destroy you. You must choose which you will embrace." The weight of his words pressed on her, yet she felt a thrill in the challenge. For the first time, she sensed that her life could be more than her title or her public humiliation. She could become someone strong, someone who commanded respect, even fear. But even as she began to grow, she could not forget Kaelin or Leora. Letters arrived from the court, carefully crafted messages that dripped with politeness and false concern. Kaelin's words were cautious, almost apologetic, while Leora's carried a subtle venom, a reminder of her betrayal. Ilara's heart ached with anger and sorrow. She had loved her sister, trusted her, and yet she had been replaced. And now, as she stood beside Draven, feeling the strange pull of connection, she could not help but compare the two men, the one who had rejected her so cruelly, and the one who had claimed her with a force that was both terrifying and intoxicating. Draven noticed her distraction, his dark eyes narrowing. "Do not let them poison your mind," he said firmly. "The world has expectations. Ignore them. Your loyalty is yours alone to give." Ilara wanted to argue, to say that her heart was not so easily claimed, yet the truth was undeniable. She felt the bond between them, subtle but persistent, like the first rays of dawn piercing a dark night. It frightened her. As the days passed, Draven continued to teach her, not just about power, but about control, patience, and the subtleties of influence. She learned how to move silently through the castle, how to read the moods of his council, and how to sense danger before it arrived. Each lesson was a test of will, and each test drew her closer to him, even as her mind resisted. One night, unable to sleep, Ilara wandered the castle corridors. The moonlight spilled through the tall windows, casting silver patterns across the stone floors. She found herself in the garden, a place of twisted trees and blooming night flowers. The scent was intoxicating, the silence broken only by the whisper of the wind. Draven appeared behind her, silent as a shadow. "The night suits you," he said softly. "It reflects what you are becoming." She turned to him, her eyes wary but curious. "Becoming what?" "Strong," he said simply, "powerful, and not just in body but in mind and heart." Ilara swallowed hard. The idea both thrilled and terrified her. Could she truly become that person? And what would it cost? For hours, they spoke of the world outside the castle, of the clans, and of the bond that had inexplicably linked them. Every word, every glance carried tension, an undercurrent of attraction neither fully understood, yet neither could ignore. In the quiet, she began to see glimpses of the man behind the legend, a man who had known loss, who carried burdens invisible to the court, yet who had chosen her. Days turned to weeks, and the festival's humiliation began to fade, replaced by a new challenge, the awakening of her own potential. She practiced, trained, and learned, discovering strength she had never known existed. Draven watched her, guiding her, yet allowing her to make mistakes, letting her grow under pressure. And all the while, the connection between them deepened. Words unspoken, glances shared, and subtle touches in moments of guidance carried an electric tension. Ilara found herself thinking of him when she was alone, her heart racing, her mind filled with questions she could not answer. But not all was calm. Leora's interference reached even the castle, sending messages designed to unsettle her. Kaelin remained at court, subtly undermining her claim, trying to sow doubt and fear. Ilara realized that the bonds of family and fate were tangled, and that her path would not be easy. One evening, as they trained in the castle's grand hall, a sudden attack from unknown enemies forced them to fight side by side. Ilara's newfound skills were tested, and she discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Draven's presence was a steadying force, guiding her, protecting her, yet allowing her to rise to the challenge. When the attackers were finally driven off, Ilara stood, panting, her body aching but her spirit alive. Draven approached, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You are learning," he said simply, "but you must understand, strength alone is not enough. Control, patience, and loyalty will define you as much as power." Ilara nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She understood in that moment that her life had changed irrevocably. She was no longer the princess who had been rejected in public. She was someone being forged in fire, shadow, and desire, someone who could command her own destiny. As they returned to the chamber, Draven's hand brushed hers. Neither pulled away, and the silent contact spoke louder than words. Ilara felt a flicker of something dangerous, beautiful, and undeniable. She was drawn to him, yet wary. The connection between them was growing, and she could feel it in every heartbeat, every breath, every glance. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking of Kaelin, Leora, and Draven. The past haunted her, but the present called to her in whispers she could not ignore. The bond with the Alpha King was real, potent, and binding, and she knew that the coming days would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. And somewhere deep within, she realized that she was no longer a victim of her fate. She was becoming something stronger, something formidable. She would face the world and those who had wronged her on her own terms. The night was quiet, the castle still, and the moonlight cast silver patterns across her chamber. Ilara's eyes closed, but sleep did not come easily. Thoughts of power, love, and destiny swirled within her. She was caught between fear and fascination, anger and desire. And yet, for the first time, she felt alive in a way that no court ceremony, no public acclaim could ever give her. And outside, in the shadows, the Alpha King watched over her, a silent guardian, a force both terrifying and irresistible, waiting for the moment when the world, and Ilara herself, would understand the true depth of their bond. The wind howled through the jagged towers of the Alpha King's castle, carrying the scent of rain and distant pines. Inside, the firelight flickered across the stone walls, casting long shadows that seemed to move like living things. Princess Ilara stood at a high window, gazing at the storm-racked forest below. Though the castle was supposed to be a refuge, she felt the weight of unease pressing on her chest. For weeks she had trained under Draven's watchful eyes, learning not only to control her own strength, but to sense the energy that flowed through the castle, through the land, and even through her own body. Each lesson was a test, and each test revealed more about herself than she had ever known. But with every step forward, the shadow of the Alpha King's past loomed over her. Draven approached silently, his presence as imposing as the storm outside. "You sense it, don't you?" he asked, his deep voice cutting through the quiet room. Ilara turned to him, her heart quickening. "Sense what?" "The darkness," he said, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "It's old, ancient. It has been bound to my bloodline for centuries. And now it stirs." Her stomach tightened. She had seen glimpses of something powerful in the castle, strange movements in the corners of her vision, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. But she had thought it was her imagination. Now, hearing Draven speak so plainly, she realized it was very real and it was dangerous. He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "This curse, it has claimed those I have loved. I will not let it claim you." Ilara swallowed hard. "Then why bring me here? Why claim me if I could be in danger?" Draven's jaw tightened. "Because you are not just anyone. You are stronger than I realized. The bond between us, it can resist the curse. But you must be ready." The fire flickered, casting shadows across his face, and Ilara noticed something she hadn't before, a flicker of vulnerability hidden beneath the mask of power. For the first time, she saw the man behind the legend, a man who had suffered, who had loved and lost, who carried the weight of centuries in his dark eyes. Days passed with an intensity that left Ilara both exhausted and exhilarated. She trained tirelessly, learning to channel energy, to move with precision, to anticipate danger. Draven was relentless, yet careful, pushing her to the limits while allowing her to grow in her own way. At night, when the castle was silent and the wolves howled in the distance, they would sit by the fire, speaking quietly of the past, of loss, of the world beyond the castle walls. Ilara began to understand the depth of Draven's pain, how the curse had taken his loved ones, how betrayal had haunted him, how isolation had shaped the man before her. One evening, she ventured into the castle's forbidden hall of mirrors. It was a long corridor, lined with tall, ancient mirrors that reflected not just her image but fragments of magic and memory. The air was thick with energy, and the moment she stepped inside, she felt a pulse, strong, dangerous, alive. Draven appeared at the entrance, his shadow stretching long across the floor. "You should not be here alone," he warned. "I had to," Alara replied, her voice steady despite the thrill coursing through her. "I feel something, something powerful." The mirrors shimmered, and as she moved closer, visions appeared, glimpses of the past, of Draven's losses, of battles fought long before her time. She saw lovers lost to the curse, allies betrayed, and a darkness that seemed to whisper, promising ruin. "It is dangerous," Draven said, stepping beside her, "but you have the strength to face it. That is why I claimed you. Not because I needed to protect you, but because you can stand against what the world cannot." Alara's breath caught. The weight of his words pressed on her, yet for the first time she did not feel afraid. She felt capable. And in that moment, she realized the bond between them was more than power. It was trust, reliance, and something deeper, something that made her heart ache with longing she could not yet name. Days later, Leora's interference reached the castle in a new form, a messenger arriving under a false pretense, carrying news meant to unsettle Alara. Kaelin's name was whispered, accompanied by lies of betrayal and manipulation. The sisters' rivalry, already deep, grew sharper with every passing day. Alara refused to respond immediately. Instead, she focused on her training, on learning to control the energy that surged through her. Each strike, each movement was precise, a dance of strength and grace. And each time she looked at Draven, she felt the pull of the bond between them, stronger, more persistent, impossible to ignore. One evening, a magical disturbance shook the castle. Shadows moved where none should have been, and a cold wind swept through the corridors. Draven appeared, his presence steadying her, guiding her. Together they discovered a breach in the castle's defenses, a supernatural force, dark and hungry, attempting to enter. Alara's heart pounded. Fear, excitement, and adrenaline surged through her. She drew upon the power within her, channeling it as Draven had taught her. Energy pulsed from her fingertips, a light that pushed back the darkness. "You are stronger than I imagined," Draven said, his voice low, almost a growl. "But you must focus. Control is everything." The attack was repelled, but the experience left them both shaken. Draven's hand brushed hers briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the bond between them. Neither spoke, but the moment lingered, heavy with unspoken emotion. As days turned into weeks, the tension between Alara and Draven grew, subtle yet undeniable. Words unspoken, glances shared, and fleeting touches carried weight. The Alpha King's control and strength both intimidated and fascinated her. And though she fought against the feelings stirring within her, she could not deny the attraction growing stronger every day. One stormy night, lightning illuminating the castle towers, Alara sat by the hearth, thinking of the path that had led her here. She had been rejected, humiliated, and yet she was learning to rise above it. She was becoming strong, capable, and aware of the power within herself. Draven entered quietly, his eyes dark with concern. "You think too much," he said softly. "The past is behind us. The present is what matters." Alara looked up at him, her eyes searching. "And the future?" she asked. He stepped closer, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "The future is what we make of it," he said, "together." The weight of his words pressed on her, stirring emotions she had never felt before. She realized that trust, courage, and love were not easy, yet they were necessary. And in that realization she felt a spark of hope, fragile yet undeniable. But the shadow of the curse lingered, a silent threat. It was a reminder that the world they navigated was dangerous, that the bond they shared could be tested in ways neither could yet predict. The next morning, a letter arrived from Kaelin. It was carefully crafted, polite, yet dripping with subtle manipulation. Alara read it and felt a mixture of anger and sorrow. She had loved him, trusted him, and yet he had betrayed her so publicly. And now she realized she could no longer be the same person. She had changed. She had grown. Draven approached as she folded the letter, his eyes watching her intently. "Do not let them control your heart," he said. "Your loyalty is yours alone to give, and your power is yours to command." Alara nodded, a sense of determination rising within her. She would not be a pawn. She would not be weak. She would rise not just for herself, but for the bond she shared with Draven, for the strength she had discovered within her, and for the destiny that awaited her. As night fell, the castle settled into silence once more. Alara stood at her window, looking out over the storm-lashed forest, feeling the energy within her pulse like a heartbeat of its own. Somewhere in the shadows, Draven watched, a silent guardian and a constant presence, waiting for the moment when the bond between them would be tested fully. And deep within her, Alara felt a stirring of courage, of power, and of longing, a promise that the darkness, no matter how strong, would not consume her. She was ready to face the shadows of the past, to confront the threats that loomed, and to embrace the connection that had begun to define her very existence. The storm raged on outside, but within the walls of the Alpha King's castle, a new force had awakened. It was not just Alara's strength, nor Draven's power. It was the bond between them, growing stronger with every challenge, every test, every quiet, electric moment that neither of them could yet name. And in the quiet, as lightning split the sky and thunder rolled across the mountains, Alara understood one truth. She was no longer the girl who had been rejected. She was someone stronger, braver, and bound to a force that could not be denied. The darkness outside was only the beginning. The moon rose high above the jagged towers of the Alpha King's castle, casting silver light across the dark stones. The air was tense, electric, with a presence that was both threatening and ancient. Princess Alara stood at the balcony, her fingers gripping the cold railing, her heart pounding. For weeks, she had trained, learned, and grown under Draven's guidance. She had faced her own fears, controlled her power, and accepted the bond that connected her to the Alpha King. And yet tonight, everything was at stake. The curse that had haunted Draven's bloodline for centuries was stirring. Shadows slithered through the castle corridors, unseen but felt, whispering threats and promises of ruin. Alara could feel its weight pressing on her, a dark energy that sought to overwhelm them both. But she would not falter. She had learned that strength came not from magic alone, but from courage, trust, and love. Draven appeared silently behind her, his presence grounding her. His dark eyes scanned the horizon, alert and calculating. "It begins," he said simply, his voice a low rumble that matched the tension in the air. Alara turned to him, her chest rising and falling with anticipation. "We are ready," she said, her voice steady though her heart raced. He nodded, taking her hand in his. The touch was firm, reassuring, and in it, Alara felt the depth of the bond that had grown between them. It was more than power or destiny. It was trust, understanding, and an unspoken promise. They descended into the heart of the castle, where the Hall of Mirrors awaited. The chamber had grown dark, shadows moving unnaturally along the walls. Candles flickered, casting uncertain light on the ancient stones. At the center, a circle of runes glowed faintly, pulsing with the rhythm of the curse. "This is where it begins," Draven said. "We face it together, and whatever happens, we endure." Alara took a deep breath, feeling the energy of the castle thrumming through her. She could sense the curse now, not just as a threat, but as a living presence, aware, intelligent, and hungry. It tested her will, probing her fears, threatening to overwhelm her with visions of failure, loss, and despair. Draven stepped beside her, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Focus," he commanded softly. "Do not let it control you. Trust in yourself and in me." Together they entered the circle of runes. The moment their feet touched the glowing symbols, A surge of energy erupted. Shadows surged around them, coiling like living serpents, and the room was filled with a chilling, otherworldly roar. Ilara raised her hands, channeling the power she had learned to control. Light flowed from her, bright and pure, pushing back the darkness. She could feel Draven beside her, his strength anchoring her, guiding her, lending his own power to hers. The curse lashed out, testing them, striking with visions of loss and pain. Ilara saw Kaelin's face, twisted with malice and regret. She saw Leora, pleading and fearful, her jealousy and guilt entwined. She saw her own family, torn apart by betrayal and misunderstanding. Tears stung her eyes, but she did not falter. She drew upon the bond she shared with Draven, allowing their connection to guide her. Their hands clasped, their hearts beating in unison, and together they faced the darkness. "Now," Draven commanded, his voice cutting through the roar. Ilara focused all her energy into the runes. Light surged, bright as the sun, radiating outward and consuming the shadows. The curse shrieked, a sound of rage and fear as its hold weakened. And in that moment, Ilara felt a clarity she had never known. She was not a victim, not a pawn, not a shadow of what others expected her to be. She was strong. She was powerful, and she was not alone. The shadows dissipated, dissolving into nothingness, leaving the hall of mirrors quiet and still. The only light came from the candles, their flames steady and unwavering. Ilara sank to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. Draven knelt beside her, lifting her gently to her feet. "You did it," he said softly, his eyes filled with pride and something deeper, affection, trust, and an unspoken promise. Ilara smiled weakly, feeling the surge of relief and triumph wash over her. "We did it," she corrected. The castle was still, the storm outside finally beginning to calm. They had faced the curse and they had won. But more than that, they had faced themselves, their fears, their doubts, their hearts, and emerged stronger. In the days that followed, the castle returned to its usual rhythm, but the air was different. The bond between Ilara and Draven had deepened, becoming a force that could not be ignored. She trained with renewed purpose, her confidence growing with every passing day. Leora and Kaelin's interference finally reached its breaking point. When they attempted to undermine Ilara's claim at the court, she faced them with a calm authority that left no room for argument. Her voice was steady, her words precise, and her presence commanding. "You may have sought to weaken me," she said, her gaze fixed on her sister, "but you have only made me stronger. My destiny is mine to claim, and no one will take it from me." Leora faltered, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and awe. Kaelin looked away, unable to meet the strength in her gaze. The court, which had once whispered and doubted, now stood in quiet acknowledgement of her authority and resilience. Even Draven watched with quiet pride, knowing that the bond they shared had transformed not only Ilara's strength but her spirit. He had claimed her, yes, but it was she who had truly earned her place, not as a pawn of prophecy, but as a force in her own right. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ilara and Draven stood atop the castle's highest tower. The world stretched out before them, forests, rivers, and mountains bathed in twilight. The air was alive with the promise of a new beginning. Draven turned to her, his hand brushing hers. "You are no longer the girl who was rejected," he said softly. "You are more than I imagined, strong, wise, and fearless. And you are mine, not by claim but by choice, by trust, and by the bond that we share." Ilara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of love, pride, and unshakable certainty. She looked into his dark eyes, seeing not just the Alpha King, but the man who had fought, suffered, and chosen her above all else. "I trust you," she whispered, "and I choose you, Draven, not because you claimed me, but because I see what we can be together." A smile, rare and soft, touched Draven's lips. He pulled her close, their hands clasped tightly, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. No shadows, no curses, no betrayal, only the bond between them, powerful and unbreakable. The night deepened and the castle was calm. Wolves howled in the distance, a reminder of the strength and loyalty that surrounded them. Elara felt the pulse of magic within her, steady and alive, a reflection of the bond she shared with Draven. In the days that followed, the kingdom began to recognize them not only as ruler and mate, but as a legendary pair, two forces intertwined by destiny, courage, and love. Their presence commanded respect, not through fear or coercion, but through the undeniable strength of character and the profound connection they shared. Alara's relationship with her sister, once fraught with jealousy and betrayal, began to heal. Leora, seeing the strength and resilience of her sister, found a new respect for her. The rivalry softened into understanding, and the court witnessed the transformation of two sisters bound not only by blood but by choice and honor. Kaelin, humbled by the events and Alara's unwavering strength, withdrew his claim, recognizing that the true bond of hearts could not be forged by desire alone. He left the court with quiet dignity, no longer a threat, and the shadow of humiliation that had once defined Alara became a distant memory. One evening, as the castle settled into quiet, Alara and Draven stood once more atop the highest tower. The moon bathed the land in silver, the stars sparkling like distant fires. They looked out over the kingdom, a shared understanding passing between them. "The world tried to break us," Draven said, his hand finding hers, "but it only made us stronger." Alara smiled, her heart light with joy and certainty. "Together," she said. "Together," he repeated, his voice firm, filled with promise. And in that quiet, under the watchful gaze of the moon and stars, they understood that their story was only beginning. The darkness they had faced, the challenges they had overcome, and the bond they had forged would guide them, protect them, and define them for the days to come. The castle was still, the kingdom peaceful, and the bond between them unbreakable. Alara had faced humiliation, betrayal, and darkness, and had risen above it all, not as a pawn of fate, but as a queen in her own right, and as the mate of the Alpha King who had claimed her heart and soul. As they stood side by side, the wind rustling through the towers and the distant howl of wolves echoing in the night, Alara realized one truth. She was not just alive, she was reborn, stronger, wiser, and bound to a force that was both eternal and transformative. Draven's hand tightened around hers and she leaned into him, feeling the power and warmth of their bond. The future stretched before them, uncertain, vast, and full of promise. And for the first time, Alara was not afraid. She was ready. Together they would face whatever came next. Together they would shape the world, their love and strength shining as a beacon for all who doubted the power of destiny, courage, and heart. And in that moment, under the silver light of the moon, they knew nothing could touch them, for they were unbreakable together.